Hello, welcome to Virtual High School Media Day. My name is Andy Conti. I'm the director of the Center for Media Innovation at Point Park University. We have a very special guest this morning. Sarah Mervosh is a reporter at the New York Times. It's a dream job for many journalists, but when I first met Sarah, she was like many of you, just a student in high school. I think the transition ahead of you is one of the more difficult ones that we face in life as we contemplate all the many choices, the things that you could do, the careers that you want to pursue. And sometimes when we look at the people who have been really successful in their careers, it's hard to imagine that they were ever in high school, that they ever sat in a classroom or sat at home and wondered, how can I get from where I am now to where I want to be in my career? I want to assure you, we've all been there. We've all gone through that process, wondering what we'll do with our careers and then figuring it out. And you'll figure it out too. So with that in mind, I want to welcome Sarah. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to be here and be talking with the first real journalist I ever met in my life.
Tell everyone about that. How do we get to know each other?
Well, I actually am a little fuzzy on the details, but of how we got connected. But I was a high school student and really interested in journalism, but didn't know anyone who did journalism for real. That seemed like so far off and unattainable. But I think my dad got connected to you in some way, and basically then you were generous enough to bring me to the newsroom, and you sort of set me up with one of your colleagues to shadow him for a day at City Hall. And then I realized, like, wow, the journalism is a real thing, and I could maybe do this one day. And I remember emailing you for years to come, and dear Mr. Conti, like, can I get your advice on? I actually was just going through some old emails the other day and found some of them, so it was very
Really?
embarrassing.
No, that's very sweet. It's for me, that's been really important to to pay back and make sure that journalists coming up have someone to talk to, because I remember being in that position myself and not always believing that I could be successful as a journalist and not knowing exactly how to get there. So when you were first starting out, what inspired you to even start working on the school paper? I think when we first met, I think you were editor of the Devil's Advocate, right, at Notre
Yeah,
Dame High School.
yeah, I think so. I'm not sure. I think I just sort of, I mean, always loved writing. I grew up and would sort of write, short stories or whatever else. And so when I got to high school, and you couldn't join the school paper until you took a journalism class sophomore year, and so I did that. Like, I did sort of the intro elective class to see whether I liked it, and I did. And then, I mean, the school paper was so much fun. I don't. It sounds like the dorkiest thing, but it was like, I actually remember they made like an MTV episode or series called The Paper, and it was about like following high school journalism students around. Um, and that was like the ultimate cool for me when I was in high school, which again is embarrassing. But um, I loved sort of being part of the paper, and you got to talk to people all across school and learn new things every day. And then as I sort of moved up the ranks, I was news editor and then became editor in chief. And that's fun too. You get to have a lot of ownership over things and, like, help mold something for your community.
As I remember, you shook things up quite a bit as news editor too, right? It was not. I think sometimes high school students think, well, we can't do real stories because it's just a high school newspaper. But the reality is, like, you can do anything almost, right?
And actually, it's like more important that you do, because you're probably the only one covering that community. And so you, one, know your community better than some other, journalist who's an adult in your world who isn't tuned in. And also, like, you have this built-in audience, and you can tell them the truth about what's going on in their school, and also ask some hard questions of the administration.
So then you went from high school. You went to Notre Dame. How did you decide that's where you wanted to go to school? And did you study journalism there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like, when we're in high school, everyone, it feels like such a big deal to decide where you want to go to college, where you can, what are your options. And for me, I mean, I Notre Dame was like, growing up was probably out of the picture, but then my mom remarried, and my stepdad had gone to Notre Dame, and so I became like this big football fan and decided to go somewhere solely based on football. And I applied to all journalism schools, including like Northwestern and the University of Ohio, or Ohio University, excuse me, and other places that had these journalism programs and good papers. And then decided just to make my decision based on football. But it all worked out. I studied a minor at Notre Dame. They had a journalism minor. They did not have a major, but I was on the school paper, and that was the most important thing in my mind because I got lots of experience, and then I did internships every year, which again, experience was really important. But I would just want to say that like if you're a high school student, sort of deciding where to go to school or feeling like this is the most important decision in your life, it is really important, but it's not like the end all be all, and you can have a good experience wherever you end up going.
And it's okay if you choose to go somewhere based on the football program. Okay,
Or
that's good
based
to
on
know.
something else like
Okay,
cost or convenience or something that's important to you. So
yeah, yeah,
even if it's not like the, most whatever you think it is that you want, like you can still have a good experience elsewhere.
yeah, yeah. So you mentioned your internships as well, and I was looking back through your resume. I saw you interned at the Almanac, your local newspaper, and
Yes.
then yeah, was that when you were still in high school, or was that after?
No, it was my after my freshman year of college, I came back to Pittsburgh and interned at the Almanac with the South Hills weekly newspaper in Pittsburgh and covered like, school board meetings and motorcycle accidents and all of the like.
Yeah, the stuff that journalists cover, all that, the daily things.
Mhm.
And then I saw you were at the Toledo Blade, right? The sister newspaper of the Post Gazette, and at
Yep.
60 Minutes, I think, right?
Right. Yeah. So I
Um,
did the Almanac, the Toledo Blade after my sophomore year, 60 Minutes after my junior year, and then the Dallas Morning News. I was an intern there after graduation. So that's something that I think, when you're in college and you're sort of looking around and your business school friends are getting full-time job offers that pay pretty well and you're like just getting an internship, it's a little scary. But that's actually a pretty typical path that I've seen that people will go after graduation and get an internship or a fellowship of some sort.
yeah, can you talk about that? Because I think students miss that step some of the times. Why is an internship so important? Like, what are the things that you do as an intern?
I mean, first of all, you like can't get a job if you haven't done an internship. So that's practically speaking really important. But also like you just get to see what it's like to work in a newsroom. You get to get a variety of stories. You work with editors who assign you stories, and sometimes you don't like them and they're really boring. Um, but then, as my one editor used to say, like, okay, if you're assigned a story, you come back with a duck. Like you go out to hunt, but you come back with something good, even if it's the assignment is not good, which is often easier said than done, but it's a good principle to try to live by. And I think, like, for example, for me, I grew up watching 60 Minutes and was like, this is the end all be all. And 60 Minutes is an amazing program that I would still love to work for one day. But when I interned there, I was sort of debating, do I want to do broadcast journalism? Do I want to do producing? And I actually realized that I missed writing. And so it was actually really good to do something that you think you want and then realize, maybe this isn't exactly the right time for me right now, but actually like not that it was not a negative experience at all. It was a wonderful experience, but sort of even if you have an experience that's a little bit like that can help you realize something else about what you don't want or do want, it's actually clarifying and helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point too about how sometimes you get terrible assignments as a starting out reporter, but it's part of your job to go and find like the great pieces in that all the, as you talked about, getting ducks and finding ducks. I think about how I started out at City Hall in Pittsburgh, and there were often these boring meetings I had to sit through, but oftentimes those boring meetings revealed like these really great stories that you didn't expect. Can you talk about so you said you interned at the Dallas Morning News, and then I know that turned into a job for you. And so what did you learn there? What was that experience like? And, how did that help you get started in your career?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think like I said, internship and fellowships, as you know, are like a pretty common path to a career, which can feel scary. And I bet there are a lot of parents out there saying like, like maybe you should go into a career with a more stable path forward. But for example, like there are actually a lot of really good and prestigious fellowships out there right now that are like a year long. The New York Times has one, and then Report for America just, and that's full time for 1 or 2 years. Just announced a whole bunch of a new cohort of people at newsrooms across the country. And so I wouldn't be afraid to, try something for a year or two. And so for me, actually, mine was just for a summer. It was a summer internship at the Dallas Morning News, and I worked on like enterprise and feature stories as well as some metro stories. And what the benefit was one, just again, more experience at a major daily newspaper. And they got to the big experience is like exposure, and they get to meet you, and you get to work with a whole bunch of different editors. And so if you're doing an internship, really anytime, because I stayed in touch with like Kim Bates at the Toledo Blade, who I now believe is like the managing editor or something at that level. I just emailed her a few months ago because she got a new promotion, and it was like, "Oh, Kim, like you were such a great city editor at the Toledo Blade when I was an intern 10 years ago now." So, like, just exposure and experience to different editors, they get to know you, and you can, then they might hire you. Then they might keep you in mind for later, like once a few years down the road. Like it's just the relationships too.
Yeah. And then, so then at some point you made the transition to the New York Times and to New York City and, the
But you're
big
skipping
newspaper
over
where
like
everybody
many,
wants to go.
many years of like
Yeah.
painful, like, awkward stories and like painful, like, what should I do with my life kind of questions, which I'm still asking myself.
Well, yeah. And I mean, that's such a great point because I think, everybody sees, oh, you get to the New York Times, but it's not just like, oh, we're just there. And now I have this successful career. And it's also not like it's over, right? I mean, when you get to well, first of all, what was it like when you got to the Times? How was that different from being in Dallas or any of the other places you had worked?
Yeah, so I worked in Dallas for 6 years, and it was a fabulous experience. I really, the newsroom was really supportive. I had a lot of really great editors and mentors and colleagues. You got to cover, I mean, I covered courts and crime scenes and, city hall related things and investigative stories and features. I mean, the whole gamut. After those years at the Dallas Morning News, I eventually was lucky enough to be offered a job at the New York Times, and that was sort of like I don't, I mean, it was an entry level job in the sense that it was on a breaking news desk, which that's often a path into a paper. And I mean, it was so exciting and scary, and of course, you think everything like what I realized going into a place like the New York Times is that everyone there is human and sort of has their own concerns and life and work duties going on, but you think everyone is like perfect and an institution, and really like everyone is just like you and me, and that's sort of both awe-inspiring and alarming at the same time.
Yeah, that's great. And I assume that just because you're at the New York Times, it's not like the journey is over. You're still growing and, achieving as a journalist, and you have a long way to go. So what are your aspirations, and how do you feel like, where are you on your path at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I just mentioned about how can I be of service. I think when I was younger, I really was focused on like how can I grow and how can I um, what is the next step, or what should I be doing next, and those are good questions to ask, and it's good to be sort of have set your sights high and have ambitions and work hard, but at this point I feel like for me, like I'm really trying to discern like how can I best be of service, and how can I tell stories that are meaningful both to the world and to me, and that's a much more nuanced question that it's I'm still figuring out.
Yeah, well, that's an exciting place to be, though, where you can tell those stories that have meaning for you. So, just to cap the whole discussion today, thanks again for joining us. But oftentimes I hear from high school students, they come to me and they say, I really want to go into journalism, but I feel like this isn't a career path for me because my parents think journalism doesn't have enough jobs, or my guidance counselor said, don't go into that field. Obviously, you went into journalism and you've had success with it. Do you have any advice for high school students who might be thinking, maybe this is something I want to try?
Well, my first advice would be just to join your school paper in high school and then in college. So, like the number one way that you can figure out, that's an easy way to like get experience and try things without actually like having to commit to your whole life. Because actually, even when I was in college, and I mean, I worked on the school newspaper like 30 hours a week and was sort of obsessed with it. But yet, I was like had a psychology major and wasn't really sure whether I like it's normal to be 18, 19, 20, 21 and not sure what you really want to do, and even be 30 or 40 or 50 and be asking questions. So like that is a great way to just get experience, and then also an internship, because I really think that that'll be really clarifying for you. Like if you like it, then maybe you'll know, and then if you hate it, then you'll know too. And to have those conversations with, I don't think you have to decide at age 18 like yes or no. I think it's much more of like a dabbling and experiential thing. And if you tell your parents that, maybe they'll be a little bit more understanding. But then also, like, if you really decide that you love it, and you're passionate about it, and you're good at it, or like you want this to be your career, there are options. Like I mentioned, like Report for America, newsrooms there are sort of new nonprofit ventures that are sort of partnering to pay for salaries. And like it's difficult. It is a career where there are layoffs or furloughs, but there are also opportunities. And I think the best way to sort of like guard yourself against that is to be good at your job and to be nimble and to be flexible. But then also to like the good thing about journalism is that you can actually like parlay that into other things. So if something does happen, like there's plenty of other options. It's always good to be able to write and think critically and be able to talk to people, and those are all skills that can be used in many careers.
Well, that's right, and I think the hard thing for many of us to remember too is that it's not like some destination we're going to get to, and we're going to like, okay, now I'm a success. I've done these things, and I've reached my destination, and I'm a success now. It's all about the process of getting there and the journey of getting there. So, Sarah, thanks again so much for taking this time to be with us today,
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
and thank you to all of you who are watching. You can keep up with us and other high school media day events at pointpark.edu/CMI or on social media on Facebook and Twitter at PointParkCMI.